My name is Beatrice, and my life was just starting to bloom, like a hopeful seedling pushing through the earth. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, and had just landed my dream job as a junior graphic designer in a bustling advertising agency in the heart of Chicago. The city felt alive, a huge canvas of concrete and glass, and I was ready to paint my own future there. I found an apartment online, a cozy two-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, and soon after, a roommate named Serafina. She seemed perfect, or so I thought. Serafina was vibrant, full of laughter, and always had a wild story to tell. She said she was a freelance event planner, always on the go, always with a new client. She decorated her side of the apartment with exotic trinkets and told tales of far-flung travels. I was a bit quieter, more focused on my budget and my career, but her energy was infectious, and I felt lucky to have such an exciting person around. My biggest dream then was to save enough money for a down payment on a small studio apartment of my own within a few years. I was careful with every dollar, meticulously tracking my expenses and putting away a portion of every paycheck into my savings account. Life felt stable, predictable, and full of promise. Then the first crack appeared in my carefully constructed world. It started with a piece of mail, a thick envelope addressed to me from a bank I didn't recognize. Inside was a statement for a credit card I had never applied for, with a surprisingly high balance. My heart started to beat faster, a frantic drum against my ribs. I thought it must be a mistake, some kind of mix-up. I called the bank, explaining the situation, and they assured me they would investigate. But then another letter arrived, this time from a car dealership, thanking me for my recent loan application. A car loan? I didn't even own a car. Fear began to coil in my stomach. I decided to check my credit report, something I hadn't done in a while. What I saw made the blood drain from my face. There were multiple loans, new credit accounts, and even a small business loan, all in my name, all opened in the last few months. The total debt was astronomical, far more than I could ever hope to pay. My meticulously planned financial future was not just cracked, it was shattered into a million pieces. The reality hit me like a physical blow. Someone had stolen my identity. And with a cold dread that settled deep in my bones, I knew who it was. It had to be Serafina. She had access to my mail, my documents, my life. How could someone I lived with, someone I shared my space and my stories with, do something so cruel? My problem was no longer just debt. It was a betrayal that felt like a poison seeping into every part of my existence, and my once charming roommate had become my worst nightmare, my personal nemesis. My first attempt to solve the problem was a direct confrontation with Serafina, though looking back, it was a naive move. I showed her the credit report, my hands shaking as I pointed to the fraudulent accounts. She didn't flinch. Instead, her face twisted into an expression of feigned hurt and indignation. She accused me of being paranoid, of making things up, of blaming her without any proof. "Beatrice," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "are you feeling okay? You've been so stressed lately. Maybe you're just forgetting things." She gaslighted me, trying to make me doubt my own sanity, and for a terrifying moment, I almost did. But the evidence was staring me in the face. My next step was to go to the police. I filed a report, showing them all the documents. They were sympathetic, but they explained that identity theft, especially between roommates, was incredibly difficult to prove. They needed concrete evidence, something more than just suspicious mail and a credit report. They said they would look into it, but I could tell by their expressions that it was a long shot. I also tried contacting all the banks and credit card companies, explaining I was a victim of fraud. They put fraud alerts on my accounts, but because the loans were taken out using my personal information, my social security number, my address, they said I was still technically responsible for the debt until a full investigation cleared my name. They wanted specific proof that Serafina was the one who did it, proof I didn't yet have. The problem began to grow bigger and more serious with each passing week. The phone calls started, first polite inquiries, then increasingly stern demands for payment from collection agencies. My mailbox was overflowing with final notices and threats of legal action. My credit score, once respectable, plummeted into the abyss, making it impossible for me to even apply for a new apartment or a new line of credit. The constant stress began to take a toll on my health. I couldn't sleep, my appetite vanished, and I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every ring of the phone or knock at the door. My work performance suffered. I made mistakes, missed deadlines, and my usually keen eye for detail became foggy with anxiety. My boss, once so supportive, started giving me concerned looks and eventually, a warning. I tried to use my dwindling savings to make minimum payments on some of the fraudulent accounts, hoping to buy myself some time, but it was like pouring water into a bottomless pit. Every dollar I had worked so hard for, every dream I had built, was being swallowed by Serafina's greed. Then came the day I hit rock bottom. Our landlord, who had initially been understanding, informed me that because of my terrible credit score, he could not renew the lease in my name. Serafina, meanwhile, had quietly secured a new apartment for herself, leaving me with the entire burden of the lease break and a looming eviction. I had nowhere to go. My parents, bless their hearts, insisted I come home. Moving back into my childhood bedroom felt like a monumental failure, a stark contrast to the independent, thriving city girl I had imagined myself to be just months before. To make matters worse, the stress and my inability to focus led to me losing my job. The agency, while kind about it, said I wasn't performing at the level they needed. I was completely broken, emotionally shattered, financially ruined, and felt utterly hopeless. I would scroll through social media and see Serafina posting pictures of lavish vacations, designer clothes, and expensive dinners, all while I was drowning in debt and despair, feeling like a complete and utter failure. Every smiling selfie of hers was a knife twisting in my gut. I had lost everything, and it felt like there was no way out, no justice to be found. All my progress, all my dreams were gone, and all I had left was a burning, cold ember of resentment. But as I sat in my old bedroom, surrounded by boxes of my belongings that now felt like relics of a past life, something inside me shifted. The deep despair began to transform into a cold, hard resolve. I had lost everything, but that also meant I had nothing left to lose. And then, a memory surfaced. Serafina, in one of her endless stories, had once offhandedly mentioned a super niche online forum she used to be active on, a place where she networked with like-minded individuals for her event planning business. It sounded shady even then, but I hadn't thought much of it. Now, it was a tiny flicker of light in my darkness. I realized Serafina's entire life was online, carefully curated, but full of cracks if you knew where to look. I remembered her having different personas, different email addresses for different clients and social groups. She was a digital ghost, but even ghosts leave a footprint. My frustration, my hurt, my sense of utter injustice all coalesced into a single, focused point. I would use every ounce of my intellect, every detail-oriented fiber of my being to expose her. I started my investigation from scratch, not as a victim, but as a hunter. With nothing but time on my hands and a burning desire for justice, I delved into the internet. I started with that obscure forum Serafina had mentioned. It was a private community, but I found archived discussions and public profiles linked to it. I remembered an unusual nickname she sometimes used, a silly inside joke she once shared, and I typed it into every search engine imaginable. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together a puzzle. I cross-referenced usernames across different social media platforms, dating sites, and even old forgotten blogs. Serafina was meticulous in creating different identities, but she was not perfect. A common email address, a recurring phone number, a distinctive turn of phrase she often used, a specific type of photo she always posted, these were the threads I pulled. I started finding connections. Serafina Stone, on Instagram, was Serafina Events on LinkedIn, but both linked to an email address that appeared on an old forum post by Sassy Seraph. That Sassy Seraph post was bragging about how easy it was to get money from unsuspecting investors for fake events. It was like peeling back layers of an onion, each layer revealing a new alias, a new scam, a new thread in a vast web of deceit. I found evidence of her operating under at least half a dozen different names, each with its own fake backstory, each used to defraud people in different ways, not just identity theft. I found her real family name, her actual hometown, and even other victims she had targeted in other cities. I organized everything into a massive digital dossier. Screenshots of social media posts, archived forum discussions, public records showing changes of address tied to different names, detailed timelines of her various online activities, and even direct messages where she bragged about her schemes to other anonymous users. It was a mountain of evidence, irrefutable proof of her calculated fraud. With my ironclad case compiled, I contacted the police again, but this time, I didn't go to the general precinct. I sought out a specialized fraud unit I'd learned about through an online support group for identity theft victims. I walked into their office, not as a desperate, tearful victim, but as a calm, determined individual holding a thick binder and a flash drive packed with incriminating data. I laid out my findings, explaining Serafina's pattern of deception, her numerous aliases, and the systematic way she had defrauded not just me, but countless others. The detective assigned to my case, a serious woman named Detective Ramirez, listened intently, her eyes widening as I clicked through the organized web of evidence I had built. The sheer volume and meticulous detail of my investigation left her stunned. Within days, an arrest warrant was issued. Serafina was apprehended while trying to board a flight to Mexico under one of her many aliases. The consequences were swift and, for me, deeply satisfying. Serafina was charged with multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and wire fraud. My meticulously compiled digital footprint evidence was central to the prosecution's case. She was convicted and sentenced to a significant prison term, finally facing justice for the ruin she had caused. For me, the journey to recovery was still long, but the burden of proof had been lifted. My name was cleared, the fraudulent loans were expunged from my credit report, and slowly, painstakingly, my credit score began to mend. I even received a small settlement from a victim's compensation fund, a small bandage for the gaping wounds she had inflicted. I didn't get back the lost year of my life, the emotional trauma, or the trust I had so freely given, but I found something else, a profound sense of empowerment and purpose. I started a new job, this time working for a nonprofit that helps victims of cybercrime, using my newfound skills in digital forensics and my personal experience to guide and support others. I had turned my greatest pain into a source of strength, helping others navigate the same dark maze I had escaped. My new normal was one of vigilance, but also of resilience. I was no longer the naive Beatrice who believed everyone had good intentions. I was stronger, wiser, and deeply aware of the hidden dangers lurking in the digital world. Life was good, rebuilt on a foundation of hard-won knowledge and integrity. I was finally truly fulfilled, helping others find their way back from the brink. Then, months later, as I was settling into my new routine, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. The sender's address was a string of random characters, untraceable. The subject line read simply, "Thank you, Beatrice." The email contained a short, heartfelt message from someone who identified themselves only as another victim of Serafina. They thanked me for my courage and for exposing Serafina, explaining that my actions had saved countless others from her schemes. Attached to the email was a small, encrypted file. My curiosity, now a finely honed instinct, took over. I spent hours decrypting it. What I found inside chilled me to the bone, but also ignited a new spark of determination. It was not just more evidence of Serafina's personal scams, but detailed information about an even larger, more sophisticated fraud ring she was clearly a part of, implicating individuals far more powerful and insidious than she was. The anonymous sender's final line, hidden deep within the file, simply stated, "Your work is not over. She was just a pawn." I stared at the screen, a new kind of thrill running through me. It seemed my journey of justice, my unexpected path into the dark corners of the internet, had just begun. I was no longer just a victim, I was now a hunter, and there were bigger, more dangerous ghosts to chase.